Hi, my name is Robert Tuckman, and I'm a co-founder of Amaze Media Labs, where we create premium podcasts for the world's top companies. We really create podcasts for companies, organizations, nonprofits. As you can see, we work with a lot of different companies and a lot of different industries on both thought leadership and brand awareness type podcasts. So the two things we do is, number one, as I said, we produce external and internal podcasts for companies, everything from A to Z. And of course, all of our podcasts are entertaining, educational, and empathetic. The second thing we do, which is really a great service, is we're able to grow the podcast. So we harness our branded audience growth network to reach your brand's ideal listeners at scale. This is a great tool where we're able to really target the exact demographic that a company wants to target. We start with the audio and video podcast production. So initially we'll work with you, and you have a team of our people who work on collaborative ideation, show outline, episode formatting. We handle all the production and editing. That's both for an audio version and video version of your podcast. We design the podcast cover art. We source the music. We mix it. We license it. We can even provide you with private coaching sessions if you're using someone who hasn't hosted a podcast in the past. We're able to work with them if they're from your company. Whether you bring in someone externally, we can work with them as well. We have a state-of-the-art virtual recording studio. What's great about that is that if you have a host, let's say, who's based in California, and you want to interview someone in Australia or New York, we're able to do that recording for you through our virtual studio, which is as close as you can get to being in person. We also send a pro-grade microphone and earbud kits to every single guest that you bring on the show. Of course, we'll set up the host with their own microphone and earbud kits and camera. We'll also do a lot of the administrative work, from coordinating calendars for all the recordings so you don't have to, and assisting guests with the technical setup. So prior to the recording, we make sure the guest is set up in a room that has good internet access, and then we're all set to go. And of course, remember, with everything that we produce and create, your company owns all of the IP. Another great feature about creating your own podcast and how we help is a podcast can act as a top-of-the-funnel marketing machine. So for every podcast that we produce, we cut custom video clips for your social media channels or for your communication channels that you want. So whether you want to use LinkedIn or Instagram or other means of communication, we're able to cut clips for you so you can use those not only to promote your podcast, but just to promote thought leadership. We also provide you with complete transcripts and show notes, and we even have the opportunity for you to embed a podcast player into your website, or we'll create your own podcast microsite for you. We'll provide you with a social media playbook, and we also provide the opportunity to develop additional branded content, since you'll have access to the entire video of the podcast episode. The other thing we do is podcast distribution and provide you with analytics. So we'll host your podcast, and if it's an external podcast, we'll make sure it appears on every platform. So of course, there's Apple and Spotify, but there's about 10 plus others that will also make sure your podcast is on. We provide a full-length video version of the podcast, as I mentioned, where you can put it on your company's YouTube channel. And if you don't have a channel, we could even create a YouTube channel just for your podcast. As I mentioned, each episode provides tons of branded content for all types of platforms. Here are some samples just of some of the work we've done. And as you can see, we do it for every social media channel and even your own communication channels. You will have a team that works for you. We will decide, or you will decide, on what type of podcast you want to produce in terms of episodes. And then what we do is we have a kickoff meeting. In the kickoff meeting, you'll meet our entire production team. You'll meet our producers. You'll meet our creatives. And we'll go through and start with the ideation of your podcast. We'll then go through all of the planning of your podcast and develop that, and then go into production. And of course, audience development, how we create audience that's targeted specifically for your podcast. The usual length of time for podcast production can vary, but for most companies who are on top of it and with us and working with us, I would say about 4 to 6 weeks from kickoff to launching your podcast. Again, you have a dedicated team from Amaze who will help you. It all starts with your client manager. That's the person who talks to you, works with you, organizes everything, organizes the entire production, organizes all the administrative tasks, and is someone that you can rely on for any questions. Of course, you have an executive producer and as well as a production assistant who help you, who work with you on the creative. And then we have an audience growth consultant, someone who can help you grow your audience both through our audience growth solutions as well as organically. And here's a slide and just an example of how we show and how we grow audience. This is all done through our branded audience growth network, which basically increases listeners by placing an opt-in web player featuring your podcast episode adjacent to relevant content that you might find when you're reading, let's say, an article on Bloomberg or an article on Yahoo that is very similar to the podcast episode that you are creating. In this case, there's an example of Cox Communications, which is a cable company. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to target developers because they want their cable to be, of course, in all of these housing complexes. So they gave us their targeted demographics. And what we do is we put a contextually relevant ad next to, of course, an article that's relevant to the podcast episode specifically. And once someone's reading an article on that same topic, it's very easy for them to see your podcast, see the ad, and then click on it and start listening. They can also go to Apple or Spotify and download it. And in some cases, you can even add a link if you want to send them back to your own website. We'll provide you with monthly podcast data and analytics reports. And this is provided to you so you can see who your listeners are, how many downloads you're receiving, how many media impressions you're getting, the demographics of your targeting that you've done and who the actual listeners are, how long people are listening for. And a lot of our podcasts, because of our technology and our growth and the level of podcasts that we create, actually end up charting. And they become on Chartable, or you might see them as a top podcast. And we will show you all of this. And we even sit down with you on a monthly basis if you'd like to go over your campaign report. The other thing we do is we're able to create live podcast events. So if you want to produce a live podcast event for an annual meeting or at a trade show, or even a retail location or conference, we can actually go on site and produce this live content, and then we can actually put it into audio and video form so you also have it as a podcast. And lastly, we're also experts in securing quality talent. We are able to get you, if needed, people to come on the podcast, people to host the podcast. It really just depends on what type of podcast that you're creating. I hope we get the chance to work with you, and any type of podcast you're looking to create, from an internal one for your own people to an external one for thought leadership or brand awareness or brand narrative. Hopefully we'll get the chance to work with you here at Amaze Media Labs.